out of shot.
Good evening, campers. It's time. Roll out of your sleeping bags, jump out of your canoes. Let's play some blues. Welcome to the TrueFire Blues Soloing Camp. We have an awesome event lined up for you guys tonight. We have really three of the best blues guitarists in the world here to share with you guys tonight. So we have Matt Schofield, we have Kid Andersen, and we have Josh Smith. They're all going to be teaching and sharing some amazing lessons with you guys tonight. So here's how this is going to work. Each of our artists are going to have their own segment. Each one has a specific topic that they're going to teach on that is based off of a particular lesson in one of their courses. But what they're going to do is they're going to do a deep dive into that lesson. So that original lesson you have in the playlist that you've been set, if you RSVP'd to this, that's why you're here. So you have access to the original lesson. So they'll do a brief overview of that, but then they're each going to give you 3 variations of that particular subject and do breakdowns of them and just some different ideas that you can play with. And then we'll also be taking your questions. So if you have questions for any of our educators tonight, please put those in the chat and please keep them relevant to the subjects that we're talking about. So we want to keep this really focused. And then the cool thing is, after this is all done, we are going to take all of this material, the original content, jam tracks, as well as the new variations, all of the breakdowns. We're going to tab out all of those variations. We're going to put all of that material together, and we're going to create a downloadable course. So you can have this whole course with these 3 amazing artists. It will download and play in your TrueFire player. So you'll have all the cool tools like looping, slow-mo, the tab sync. It'll all be there, and it will basically take this and make a really cool and amazing learning experience out of tonight. But wait, there's more. And that more is, if you're here tonight watching this, you get a special discount. So you're going to get 50% off of this course on a pre-order. So there's a link below where you can pre-order it right now. And if you're thinking you might wait till the end and see if you want to buy this, let me just tell you, if you're wondering if Matt Schofield, Kid Andersen, and Josh Smith are worth buying this, I can save you that decision right now and make that for you. Yes, you should get this pre-order set up right now for 50% off. It's crazy. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate everyone being here tonight. I'm Jeff Sheets, the Director of Education here at TrueFire. I'm excited for what the night is going to hold. So without further ado, I want to talk about our first educator. So our first educator up tonight is Matt Schofield. Matt, of course, amazing player, traveled the world, played so many things, has so many accolades as a player. He has 2 different blues speak courses at TrueFire, which is sort of his thing. He's got more courses in the works. So we are really excited to have him here tonight sharing some of his amazing stuff. So without further ado, let's just go right to say hello to Matt. How's it going, Matt?
Hey, Jeff, going good, man. Hanging in there, So
awesome.
Always happy to be involved with anything going on at TrueFire, man. It's been a real game changer for me being with you guys. So I'm happy anytime I can join you,
Well, we welcome you anytime you want to do anything. You are always welcome. Hopefully soon back at the TrueFire studios, but right now we'll do it this way if we have to, right?
What we're doing, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. So tonight you're going to be talking about how to approach blues changes. That's sort of the subject that you're going to dig into, and you've got some variations, but that comes from your Blues Speak course. So let's start off, maybe give us a little overview of, what you think about that and how you think about approaching blues changes.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually like the number one thing I get asked by people who've heard me play and are looking to perhaps expand their vocabulary as a player. It's always the question. It's, if you come from a background of just playing the blues scale over everything all the time, which I did for the first 10 years of playing the guitar as a teenager, it can seem a little intimidating to try and, start thinking in terms of expanding into chord tones and different harmonic flavors. A lot of times people even ask me, what are the outside notes I'm using? And they're not outside notes at all. They're actually chord tones. So that's the first place that you start finding a new path out of the minor pentatonic. It's very much built around trying to nail the chord tones. In my case, as the change in the 12-bar blues comes round, I'm aiming to land on usually the root note of the change. So our track's in A today. So I'm looking to land on that D when the 4 chord comes around, or the major third of the chord when we're playing over 7th chords, So in that case, it's an F sharp here in D. And the same for the 5 chord. I want to land on that E or on the A flat. So it sort of seems daunting. It seems like there's a lot to know in the lesson segment that we've shared in advance. I explained the different scales I use over each chord. The minor pentatonic works on all of them, and the major pentatonic for each change. So the A major pentatonic, D major pentatonic, E major pentatonic, and then putting them all together and kind of getting a sort of, I suppose you call it Mixolydian sort of sound, you know? So that is, that can be a lot of information for people to learn when you're just coming from playing the blues scale all over the place, you know? So in the variations, I've tried to break it down a little bit as somewhere to start from with each of the ideas there, be it the minor pentatonic, the major pentatonic, and putting it together. So the variations are like that, you know?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's great information. So let's go ahead and let's jump into the first variation. So you can do a little overview and then we'll roll the track. So give us a little overview of this first variation, which is based on the minor pentatonic, right?
Yeah. In fact, I deliberately decided for this first one to every single note I'm playing, or I should say fingering, because the fingering is entirely minor pentatonic. So most people, if they've been playing a bit of bluesy type guitar, are going to be familiar with that. Of course, all of these you want to be familiar with across the whole neck as much as possible, and that just takes some time to get around. But I just wanted to start with only playing the most familiar scale to many guitarists, but then reaching into the changes of the blues progression by bending notes. Still, you know, so you're going to be in a familiar fingering, but we're bending, you know, in this case, up to that major third of the 4 chord, you know. I'm trying to land on the root notes of each change. So it's kind of simple, but it's about playing the right note at the right time, really. And they're all contained within even just the minor pentatonic. So it's possible to do that. So I wanted to give an example of trying to bring out like the melody with just that. It's the blues scale, actually, because I'm using the flat 5 as well. But just that scale that most of us are pretty familiar with, you know. So maybe we can roll the example. Is that a good time to do that, right?
Awesome, man. That sounds great. So give us a little breakdown of kind of what you're doing there. Show us a little bit of what's happening.
Yeah, so I didn't put my finger anywhere that wasn't in the blues scale there, you know, and I'm using bends to reach for the changes, you know. So first of all, the real important one to me is how you hit that major third in. So we're in key of A, seventh chord. Well, the minor pentatonic contains the minor third, the C. the chord that we're playing over contains the C sharp, the major third. So there's that's the tension in the blues sound. So if watching that clip, you'll see that I'm always just pulling on that third between the minor and the major, and that's where it really starts to sound like blues playing to me. You know, all the great blues guitarists, B.B. Albert King, they all have that little bend in there. So we're not needing to learn a whole bunch of scales just to already start moving our playing towards the chords. You know, that's kind of how I think of it, trying to mold it around the tonalities in the chords. Learning all the scales in the world will not tell you how to use them. The only thing that's going to tell us how to use these scales is our ears. So I just wanted to show that without even learning a new scale, we can start making it a bit more musical, you know, and get a lot of mileage out of it. So as I say, there was no note that I played there that wasn't in the blues scale. Nothing fancy. Of course, then it just comes down to phrasing and things like that. But the main thing on this one is hitting that third, and so I'm, you know, bending up, and that is bending the 5th degree of the pentatonic. Actually gives us the third of the 4th chord. Something you heard B.B. King do since, you know, decades ago. And that's it starts to tie it all together and make it sound melodic. So we didn't even have to, you know, learn any new scales to start making it fit, is what I'm looking for, you know.
Awesome. So we've got a question is, would you suggest for someone trying to get to that point, trying to learn that, would you suggest kind of finding that minor third to major third in different positions and trying to find those little spots, you know, where you maybe you're familiar with the different patterns of the pentatonic scale, but maybe you haven't done that in the third pattern, you know? So is that a good way to approach that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's anything that you learn in one place, it's go on and find out everywhere that you can do it, and that'll help you to tie your playing together, you know. So to be able to go, you know, that's just 3 octaves worth of a simple blues lick, but I know that my minor third is there, it's there. You know, it's just taking the time to do that, and we want to know what the note we're about to play with our fingers is going to sound like, and so learning it across the neck is you just don't have to wonder where you are. Then it just takes a little time, but you know what's going to happen if I bend that note. I know what it's going to sound like. So just from having done it, there's no real way around that. The scale's never going to tell you that. The scale can tell you, you know, where to put your finger, but how to make it sound right is up to your own ear. So
that's great. That's great advice right there. And if anyone has any questions sort of relevant to this particular subject or any of the things that Matt's going to talk about, drop those questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those that sort of tie in with these particular lessons, these variations, get to as many of those as we can. But that was the variation number 1. That was our first variation based on minor pentatonic, right? So how do you set it? Let's set up your second variation. Where do you go with your second variation?
Well, the second is now I'm deliberately only playing the major pentatonic, which is, I think, less familiar to people than the minor pentatonic. For the most part, I hear guitar players using it less, but it really, you know, it deserves its own recognition, the major pentatonic, because as I wanted to demonstrate with this clip, you can play a whole blues using only minor pentatonic, no blues scale at all. It's got a different sound, but I've found that limiting yourself, saying, okay, I'm going to see if I can play 2 or 3 verses of a shuffle as we are, and I'm only going to play minor pentatonic fingering. You know, I'm bending again to bring the blues sounds out of it, but the fingering is only major pentatonic. Sorry, in this case, it's limiting yourself is good for learning the sound of these scales, these notes, you know, so that you absorb it. And again, it's not just a place to put your fingers. It's, if I play this note next, I know what that's going to sound like. And again, the only way to do that is to absorb the sounds. So yeah, this is entirely major pentatonic, but I'm playing the major pentatonic from each chord. So I play the A major pentatonic on the A chord, I play the D major pentatonic on the D chord, and I play the E major pentatonic on the E, which is the 5 chord, you know. So check it out. It still sounds like blues to me, but without any blues scale, you know.
That sounds great, man. And you're right. It sounds like blues.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But it's using a different shape, right? Or different scale.
Completely different set of notes to the previous one. And so it's important to have a grasp on how to use all of the scales that I talk about in the original lesson from the course. How to use them completely, you know what I mean? Like you fully delve into it and go, okay, I could just use that for this whole chorus, and it's going to sound like music, because we're trying to play music, not scales. So it's an important thing. And at the same time, you're feeding your own ear with the knowledge of what that scale sounds like. So you're able to inform your vocabulary and make good choices, not based on knowing a pattern on the board, but knowing that it's going to sound right, you know. So and playing the changes on the blues or on anything, but it's very much about playing the right note at the right time. So you don't need a huge vocabulary. You don't need to be able to blow over giant steps, you know, with all those changes flying by. But we do still have to play the changes on a blues in order for it to sound right. So it's informing your ear every time is what you're looking for, you know.
Awesome. So show us a little bit about kind of how you approach that major pentatonic scale there.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times it's thought of as people learn the minor pentatonic and then they learn that it's the same as the minor pentatonic down a major third. But I don't think that does the scale justice to just think of it like that, as though it's some kind of, you know, other version of the minor pentatonic. So I always enjoy coming at it from a kind of arpeggio type sound. You know, you can play them like that, but because it flows like that, and it gives you a great way to get around the neck as well. That's what it really lets you link up the positions. So you got your, you're playing your blues in A. It's a good linking type line to get to a different position in the minor or major pentatonic. Took me right up to my 5 chord on the change there. Again, it comes down to knowing it all over the neck. So the same thing applies. And that's nothing but time is going to get you that one of just knowing your way around,
That's
and
awesome.
Then the important bit, though, and this is the bit that I do get asked about so much, is that when those changes come around to the D, the 4 chord, I'm playing the D major pentatonic. So we're really starting to play the changes now. We're playing the right scale for the right chord, and the same for the 5. And again, we know that all over the neck wherever we find ourselves, so that we can instantly access the sound we're looking for, because we know what a major pentatonic sounds like by having played it enough.
Yeah, great answer. Great answer, man. So we've got another question here. Basically says, in your course material, you mentioned the importance of knowing about triads. So any tips on how to learn to build and then use triads in this kind of context?
Yeah, I mean, that's the core of the chords in almost all, the dominant 7th triad, so we're in A, we've got an A, we've got a G, and a C sharp. And that's like at the heart of each chord. However you go on to, people might learn 7ths as a fixed shape, a fingering like that, a bar chord or something, or perhaps open A7s like that. But really, you want to be seeing the chords as not as fixed shapes, then you're locked into that. You want to be able to spot the triad inside them that's giving the chord the information about what it is, So in A there, we've got our root 7th third. That's our guide. Whatever we add to that is the core of it. And same, it moves to the D7th there. So it flips around D7th with the F sharp and C. Up to the E. So I'm just playing 3 notes every time. They're just 3-note chords. But you can get around a whole blues like Okay, that's just triads. And it's just that simple fingering. Of course, that again carries on all across the neck. But you just look into those 3 notes, and they're your guide. And all the chords that you would be playing in the blues, whether you end up playing a full 9th chord or 6th kind of B.B. King thing, or 9ths up here or 7ths up here, they all contain those triads, and so they're your guide everywhere. And so it's important not to see chords as closed fingerings that, I know that's an A7th. We need to look inside the A7th and see the core of our information, which is what the root note is, what the 7th note is, and what the 3rd is, and that's going to take you everywhere.
Awesome. Let's do one more question here in this section.
Yeah.
Because I think it's going to lead us into our next section, which is can you go over moving from a minor pentatonic to the relative major when soloing, combining the major and minor pentatonics?
Well, yeah, that is our next example, actually. So I just took the 2 previous examples and I put them together. And at that point, you could say you're really playing Mixolydian scale. To me, I could see it that way as well. Those notes, because the Mixolydian is the mode of the 7th chord that we're playing over. So that's the correct thing to play. But of course, blues is so much more than being the correct thing to play. It's about creating some kind of statement with the notes that you play and saying something. So at this point, I've taken the time to learn the minor pentatonic all over the neck, the major pentatonic all over the neck. So when I put them together, I'm not really thinking about scales anymore. I'm using my ear that I've trained by spending time in those scales, and now I know which notes I can reach for. And again, it's the right note at the right time. But it's going to give you access to the thirds on the changes. So that's the big thing with the major pentatonic. It's got the major thirds in there. So I mean, there's really lots of different ways you can look at it. You could go, okay, I'm playing minor pentatonic, but I'm playing the major thirds of each chord, or it could be I'm playing Mixolydian. Or it could be I'm mixing major and minor pentatonics. And in some ways, I'm doing all of those all the time. So it's whatever the easiest way to look at it for you is. But that's why I wanted to break up the examples in this way and say you can do it with the minor pentatonic that you're probably already more comfortable with. You can start adding the major pentatonic that maybe you're less comfortable with, but it's going to lead you to some of those chord tones more easily than the minor pentatonic, which doesn't have the thirds in. And then you've got to close your eyes and try and make it sound good. And because that's also, as I say, the scales aren't going to tell you how to play the blues. Listening to great blues playing is going to tell you how to play the blues. And the scales will only be your guide, your map to those notes. But you got to know what to do when you get there. So.
Well, that's a great answer. And we have a lot of great questions. We have, so many people tuning in. Laying down some awesome questions, and I'm going to jump into one more question because that triggers it. The question is the placement of the ornaments, hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, etc., seems key in sounding not just like you're playing a bunch of scales, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes things sound unlike scales and more like soloing. So any tips on how to place those? When do you know when to bend versus when to slide versus how do you come up with that? Is there any way to do that other than kind of what you're talking about, which is listening and finding out what somebody else has done?
I don't know what the magic way to get there is. I wish I did, but I learned to play from listening to great blues records, and in some ways that's gonna inform your ear to what you might be looking to say yourself, like learning a language of any kind. But it's listening to what you're playing and not going, okay, I can play this note because I know a pattern. There's really no other way around it. You have to have the idea in your head of what you want to sound like, and that could be really simple. That's why I wanted to do the minor pentatonic one first. I'm not playing anything that anybody else can't learn. There's not really that much technicality to it. So really it does come down phrasing, timing, and having listened to the music. It's immersing yourself in it. You're never going to play great blues unless you listen to great blues. So that's the number one answer about this every time. And you can continue to inform your vocabulary, but you have to be inspired by the language. It's like moving to another country. The best way to learn the language is because you have to communicate. And you can learn from your phrase book, but it's not the same as actually having a conversation. So that's where you've got to keep your eye on that goal, really. And it can be simple, just starting with when the 4 comes around, and just trying to play one note out of the chord, you know, and you start to create it, you know, it starts to fit together. So start simple, you know, unless you can play something simply well, you're not going to be able to play something more complicated well. It's you have to you know, walk before you can run, as they say. Yeah. All the details are important with the blues. It's the little details, the timing.
Very, very good, very cool. All right, well, let's do this third. Let's do our third variation, man. Let's do that. Tell us just briefly what it is, and then we'll roll the track.
Yeah, so this is just me putting it together. I don't think I do anything outside or anything. It's just the blues scale and the major pentatonics from each of the changes are 3 chords, and which is pretty much just what I do. So this is me just doing the thing I do most of the time. So and that's it.
Nice. Yeah. Then you're right. That sounds like you. That sounds like what you do.
Yeah,
you do that. So tell us just, I know we've kind of been talking about it all along, but you know, give us any other insight into that, how to mix that up, how to put those things together. Are you thinking about, you know, over the 1 chord, 4 chord, and 5 chord, that combination of, you know, the major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, and I realize you are probably not thinking about that because you play it, but for a beginner, or somebody that's just trying to get a grasp of that, how would you suggest they get a hold of that?
I suggest, just as I did when I got to a point of trying to expand the vocabulary as a player, just start simply adding like one thing into it. So you know, when you're used to soloing with your blues scale, and just go, all right, when the 4 chord comes around, let's go for the third. Just like, so now I know that an F sharp is the major third of the 4 chord, and that's going to lead the ear. It's going to lead the listener's ear, and it's going to give shape to your solo and your playing that people can follow along. So just, you know, learning the scales is something to have in the back of your mind, but you don't want to be looking at the neck and thinking about scales when you're playing blues or anything really. So just start with like, okay, I'm going to try and get that third. So we know it's here. Okay. So we can go. there's a little lick of just hitting that third. And once you get a feel for that, you try it in a different spot. So we're starting to play that 4 chord as it comes around. And then we try it maybe somewhere else, you know. We can bend into it. And that's just adding one note to our minor pentatonic. So I'm just adding the thirds from the 4 chord when we're playing over the 4 chord to my minor pentatonic, kind of bluesy stuff there. It's just one additional concept, and it's going to tie you playing together. And once you got a handle on that, well, you just do the same thing up 2 frets for the 5 chord. So. And we're starting to tie all the changes together. So that's the place to start. Start simple and just try and get really comfortable with one of them. Yeah. Or even just landing on the root note of the change on the beat. So it's for the quick 4 there. Just making that statement, landing on a root note, is going to go a long way to making it sound like you know what you're doing.
That's good. That's what we're all shooting for.
Yeah.
Sound like, right. At least sound like we know what we're doing. Yeah. Got one other question here. So when you're doing these and you're thinking about landing on particular, you know, targeting certain notes, are you thinking about the actual note, or are you thinking about the interval, like land on the 3rd, or are you actually thinking more in terms of that's a C sharp?
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not thinking. I have to think now to tell you it's a C sharp. I know that it is if I take the time to look or think about it. But no, I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm in audio world when I'm playing, when I'm on a gig, and I'm just listening to, you know, you're in a constant feedback loop. So yeah, it would be intervals. It's a combination of muscle memory and then reaching for a melody in your mind and knowing how to make the leaps across the, you know, across the bridge to it, you know. So it's reaching for a sound, and you always want to be aiming to be playing something that's pleasing. I'm just trying to please my ear, myself. I'm trying to make it sound. When I play, I'm searching for the sounds that make me feel the same way as when I listen to BB King or Jimmy or, you know, whoever, you know. I'm reaching for those sounds in my mind, and so there's all the other stuff is like having a conversation. We're not thinking about grammar or you know, syntax or anything. You're just talking, you know.
Sure. That's awesome. So all right, we got a few more questions, so we're gonna do a lightning round. These are going to be rapid fire. Give me your fastest, bestest answer you can. Yep. What about double stops? Do you have any rules or formula for how you approach double stops?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with the chords or single note playing. The same thing applies. I just see it as 2 notes that I know work at the same time, instead of 1 note that I know works. And of course, after a while, you see all the notes in the chord. So you know to get around. I know which 2 I can play at once. Yeah, it's just that I've played it all enough, because I don't see chords and lead as different things. So it's just either playing several notes at once or several notes all after each other. And so stops fit right in the middle of that. You're starting to play more than 1 note at a time.
Fair enough. It's a little bit related to that. Beyond targeting the chord tones, how are you constructing your lines, your individual note choices? Yeah. How do you approach those? Is that all by ear? Are you thinking scalular, or are you thinking just whatever that note is you need to complete what you just heard in your head.
Yeah, it's just the sound, really. Yeah. I mean, it's all informed by having taken the time to learn scales. But in some ways, you know, the minor pentatonic, where we all start, if we want to play, you know, that was the first thing I ever learned because I wanted to play blues guitar, is still my guide, really. I'm still kind of getting around the guitar with that, but I just know a few notes in between for a variety of reasons, be it the learning the chords so that I know how to build chords and the off the triads, or and then knowing the scales that fit with those chords. It's just adding those little bits in, but it's the minor pentatonic still my guide, you know.
All right, cool. So this is not exactly a quick, easy question. I'll try to make it quick and easy. Talk a little bit about how you use the diminished scale over the four chord. So what we'll do is give us a cool lick of the diminished scale over the 4 chord.
All right. Well, I'd do something like if I was. There's our 4, right? Something like that to get back to the 1. So I'm starting on the 4, nice. And then so your diminished scale starts a half step up from that. But so I'm kind of the trick is okay. The first 3 notes are D triad anyway. We're not going outside there at all. In fact, 4 notes. We're all still in the scale, and then that one comes. So it's diminished arpeggio. So it's really only 1 outside note, and that's the blue note that we're playing quite a bit anyway, but we put it over the 4. And if you assemble it in the order of a diminished arpeggio, it starts to sound kind of cool. So yeah, that would be one I use. Or you know, you might want to go up to the that's a half whole step scale, the famously Robin Ford sound. That's where I learned it from. So that'll get you around. That's just going straight up the half whole scale. But again, starting with a major triad, you know, and so you're like tricking the ear. You're going to go, okay, this sounds familiar. Oh, where have we gone now? You know, it's kind of like it's getting into it in a familiar way. But that's landing back on the 3rd of the 4th. So, yeah, it's sometimes using the diminished only gives you like 1 or 2 more unusual note choices, but that can have a huge effect when you play it at the right time. So it's definitely a linking type.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Good answer to a question that we could talk about that all night.
Well, that's the whole thing. Yeah.
That's a whole other.
Robbins is your man for that, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that sounds beautiful what you're doing there. So, man, we could keep this going all night, but I know we got to wrap it up. So,
yeah.
Here's the last question was, I'm going to modify it a little bit, was basically what's the single blues album we should study? So I'm going to extend that and say, if you had to give 3 blues albums that you would say, man, listen to these, learn these, dig into it, absorb it, what would be the 3 blues albums you would suggest people dig into?
Oh man, that's so difficult. I mean, first of all, B.B. King just comes to mind immediately because so much of what we're all playing is from him. You know, it really is. He just moved the whole thing on with electric blues guitar like never before. So, I mean, maybe Live at the Regal is a lot of people. It's one of the greats of all time, Live at the Regal. Or I like Live at Cook County Jail, although there's probably more like cool guitar playing on Cook County Jail, but Live at the Regal is a more overall record, I suppose. And then, man, you know, well, after B.B. King, it was Stevie Ray that really made me want to play, you know. And of course, there's been so many people attempting to sound like Stevie, but what I get from him is like just his devastatingly good phrasing and timing. I mean, he just doesn't play a note out of place, you know. So maybe like Texas Flood's got it all there, you know. But then you've got to listen to Albert King. You know, as my dad told me way back when. Well, if you like Steve, you got to listen to Albert King. So it's very, very hard for me to pick one or two things. I'm so informed by so many guys. Albert Collins, you got to listen to Albert Collins. You know, Albert King, Freddie King, Jimmy. Those are my original core guys. You know, so and listening to the older players who are on paper, it's more comes across more simply, right? People don't think of BB King as being flash. It's hard to play like that. So actually try it. Go pick up a BB King record and try and cop some of his phrasing, and you're going to be in for a surprise of how complex and sophisticated it is, even though it's simple. But that will inform your playing much more, than even listening to Stevie's going to take you down a different path that's not going to be as useful because you're going to be trying to play something more technically difficult. But learning some BB King, some Albert King is going to add the right sounds to your playing. It's going to inform your ear because these guys invented this music, not Stevie Ray, not me. BB King, Albert King, Buddy Guy, they created the sounds that the rest of us do. And this wasn't a sound in the world before these guys. So it's important to listen to them.
That's a good answer, man. Always study from the masters. Well, you maybe didn't invent it, but you are definitely taking it to a whole other level. And we so appreciate it. I know TrueFire students appreciate everything you do. They love your courses. We get that all the time. And just want to say thank you for being here tonight with us and sharing all of this knowledge. We hope we will be doing it again soon, man, for sure. But definitely thanks for being here, Matt. And we'll get together again as soon as we're able.
I hope so. Take care, everybody. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, buddy. That's awesome. Great job, Matt Schofield. Amazing teaching there. So many great tidbits there to learn for everyone. So if you're digging this, just hit the thumbs up, right? Hit the thumbs up button. That would be awesome. We should have lots of thumbs up after that amazing bit of teaching and all those cool performances. Every one of Matt's solo variations sounded like the perfect solo. So, it's like, what else do you do from there? Remember, all of this material, after this evening is over, we are going to tab out all of the cool licks, all of these variations of performances, and we're going to put it together in a TrueFire course that you can download. You'll have all the tab sync, the slow-mo, looping, all the cool tools that you're used to having with TrueFire courses. So go to the link. We'll post the link. Someone is going to post the link in the chat, but the link is right below the video. You can go there and you can pre-order this course for 50% off right now. So go pre-order it. That way it will show up. You'll get an email saying it's available, and it will make your day. I'm telling you, it'll give you a lot of good stuff to work on and play with. So we have a lot more blues to go tonight. We are by no means finished up. Because let's just go right into our next artist, right? I believe our next artist is ready. Mr. Kid Andersen, once again, another artist that has done several courses with TrueFire, has several more coming up that we're going to be doing, coming out. His Blues Refinery, just good stuff. The licks, a lot of great stuff. If you caught him on our live festival, he likes to play before an amazing live crowd, even when he's by himself. So, we're thrilled to have him. Definitely one of our favorite players and our favorite peeps. So without further ado, let's shout out, see how Kid's doing. How you doing tonight, man?
Hey, I'm doing all right. I enjoyed watching Matt's little thing there.
Absolutely.
Except now I don't think I have anything left to say.
I cannot believe you don't have anything left to say.
I'm just kidding.
I'm sure.
I'll make something up.
We'll come up with something, right? Well, man, good to have you here. So we're basically going to take a look at a lesson from your course. Basically, we're talking about harmonically relevant soloing. So everybody got that original, but let's do a recap. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about, what that means to you, how you approach that, what you're thinking about when you're talking about harmonically relevant soloing.
Yes. Well, what I'm talking about when I mean that is that you know, and that's Matt touched upon this quite heavily. He kind of grabbed it, as a matter of fact. But that's it's not just playing the notes of the notes of the blues scale, the minor pentatonic. Just to basically make it so that you can hear what chord you're on, even without accompaniment. To kind of like uh, you can always in blues, with the minor pentatonic scale, you can get away with kind of noodling on it, and nothing will sound wrong. But what I mean by harmonically relevant stuff is playing chord tones that are target notes for you, and that let people know what which change you're on, and what you're doing with it. And it's just it takes a little bit of you kind of got to learn your way around the fretboard, and also uh, I guess you could call it music theory, but it really helps you sound like you know what you're doing.
Nice. Very cool. Well, I know you've prepared a few variations that you're going to talk about. I think the first one's sort of building, from like a simple motif. So give us a little overview of that, of how you look at that, and then we'll roll the track and listen to you play it. But give us a little bit of insight into what you're thinking about, like building that motif.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about was mainly, what the hell did I say in that video? and and I try to apply that to all the examples, really. So I got kind of gradually more and more out there. So and don't learn everything that's in the, but um, no, it's a very important lesson that I was installed in me, ingrained in me by early guitar teacher. I said that in the video, and that's just to give a solo a sense of continuity, and also conversational type of element. Come up with when you start a solo, come up with a musical idea. It don't have to be much, but just something that's a little signature, a little opening statement, if you will, and then you know kind of revisit that at various points, so so that everything just kind of hangs together and feels like it belongs together, and then you telling a story, or at least you're like talking about one subject, to put it like that. And that's that's just something that I learned that really separates, if you get that into your musical philosophy, subconscious, then it'll really separate you, set you apart from guys who are just like aimlessly noodling. So yeah, that's what I'm actually in all of the examples. I'm doing that, with a simple musical idea, and you just kind of I have three different ideas. So here's number one, and I kind of explore them and just kind of see where they take me, and that's kind of how I roll, anyways.
Awesome. Well, let's check it out.
All right.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
Yeah,
So tell us a little bit about
nice
what you're doing
fade.
there. Kind of break some of those ideas down for us.
Yeah, I well, and, I watched it again, and I noticed, some stuff that I have to say I didn't consciously think of at the time. Like I was saying, I was kind of replaying the video in my head to see, play something that's relevant to what you said. But yeah, now so you can hear on the beginning. Oh, B flat. Yeah. The first thing I play is the idea, as it were, the musical idea to. That's my starting point, and I just kind of go from there, and I can hear I repeat it over the first quick four chord, but in that key, and I do it in E flat. And the third time I play it, what I'm doing, I'm starting with that idea, and I'm building something on it. I'm adding something to it, and you can also hear that on the second round. The second about minute or something over the solo, part two. I'm starting with the same type of idea again, but I can't remember exactly what. So now I have, thank God I got another idea. I got another little musical statement that just came to me in the spur of the moment, and but what I'm doing there is instead of discarding the first idea in favor of the second one, it goes, okay, we're on to something new. I'm tying them together, and I let the second idea be an evolution of the first one, and that's I think that's what went on in my head more or less, and also, as you can hear on the first verse there, by the time we get to the five chord, then I play something that's I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something different. It was not really relative to that idea, but it's more of an, let's just say, a reply, something like that, a contrast. Because I mean, you want to hear a guitar solo. You don't want to hear somebody just playing the same lick over and over again for however many bars. Uh, that would be quite dull. But uh, as a starting point, as something to develop, think of something. Now, where did the idea come from? I don't know. It could be, it's probably from listening to music, and there's a number of ways you can come up with ideas. I can't really, give a great answer to that, but once you get one, that's a good way to treat it, I think.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. We'll do a couple of questions. So we've got a question saying, for you, does playing in a horn key like B flat make you think more outside the box than a guitar key like A? Or do you do that? And would you suggest playing in B flat just so you can play more easily with horns?
Um, well, I don't really. I mean, listen, to go from A to B flat, all you got to do is like move up one fret. It's like not, if you can play an A, you can play in B flat. you know. However, he is right, because that track was originally a backing track for that I made for a saxophone instrumental. So that's so that is true. I mean, but I don't have a particular, like, preference. There's nothing I feel like I can do in B flat that I can't do in the other keys. Of course, E is kind of a whole study unto itself, with all the open strings, and you read it way down anywhere. But yeah, I mean, keys. I'm not encumbered by key signatures or the like.
All right, good. Good answer. Excellent answer. So another
People
question
will
is,
think you're more sophisticated though if you that's a good shortcut to sophistication. Say B flat and they go ooh
fancy.
yeah.
So a question about, kind of what you did there in that first one with that motif is, do you think about that as kind of a call and answer kind of thing too, where you do something here and then you move it? Is that sort of, how you're thinking, approach those things sometimes?
Absolutely. You know, I jotted down some notes here, and I was getting to that, but that's cool. We touch upon it anyways because, music. I mean, to me, you solo, improvisation and just music in general, it should have a conversational quality. So, and two of the most important things in blues is, call and response. Well, maybe that's one thing, two things. It's a concept. It's a building block of blues, and it's a building block of language, which, music is a language. It's like question and answer. That's how I think of it. I think, actually in the third example, I do a pretty. I noticed I was doing something interesting with that. I can talk about that when we get to that one. But absolutely, I try and make my solo, my guitar, just be as conversational as possible. And what I was gonna say, there's really two concepts that I'm talking about in the original video that was in my Blues Refinery video, and the one is developing an idea, and the other one is a harmonically relevant soloing. The thing about those things is they are, when you put those two concepts together, you have an idea and you go for these target notes that, sound like you're landing on your feet. Basically, it's just, it's to make it sound like you have a plan, even if you don't really have a plan. If you just utilize those tools, it'll a plan might even formulate, it might even materialize as you're playing.
That's awesome. Very cool. So that's some good stuff, man. How about let's do another variation. I know you got 3 variations. So let's give us a breakdown or a overview. I'm sorry, an overview of this second variation.
All right. Yes, I'll talk about it. I just scroll down, look at my notes. I'm so professional today. Well, this one, it's like the same. It's the same kind of concept. I started with an idea. I had the luxury of making sure I had an idea before I hit record. When I did that. It's a very simple idea. It's basically just like a climb, and what I do a lot of, and some might say to a fault, on this variation is I do these climbs, and the first one I do, I believe, is from chromatic, from the third. To the fifth. I'm trying to think, what key am I in? They're all in B flat. And something is, I'm doing it. I'm trying to keep climbing, So when I get to the fourth, and I'm almost. Anyway, I keep climbing, and another thing I do is I always aim for harmonically relevant notes. That would be, A number 1, chord tones. The third of the chord, and the fifth, the third, and the seventh are kind of the most telling notes. I mentioned that in the video. Those are like super important notes. If you play rhythm guitar, you can get by a lot of time by just playing those notes. B flat. That's just the third and the seventh. They contain so much information. So those are some good target notes. But what I'm doing here for some of this is that the more I climb up, the more my target notes become notes that are a little more out, outside, not overly sophisticated, but I think I think at one point I climb up to the 9 chord, and another thing I'm doing on there, which can be very effective, and that's a big part of the soloing with intent, is that sometimes I can kind of since you do these climbs and ideally you land on chord notes that they feel like an answer to a question, like a response to a call. So you land on those. And if you land on those, you can take some weird little, you can hit a couple of, technically, wrong notes, or notes that don't really belong in there, but on the way there, because you have a destination. So it's, the end result where you land. Like if you land on your feet, you won. That's and that's what I have to say. I think this is one. I might not land on my feet the whole time on this one, but I guess it depends on where Tommy faded it out. So, but
well, let's give it a listen and see how much on your feet you are.
Nice face.
Nice stuff, man.
I think that's right where it started going wrong.
Tommy's an expert. He's a master at that.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy.
So when you're doing that, I mean, you're kind of doing those chromatic climbs. That builds a little tension.
Hope for the best.
And then it also allows you then to do other things between there. Is that kind of how you look at that? Putting those chromatics in there and then doing
that's too. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that sounds like a great plan. So show us how you do that. Give us a little info on that.
Well, I studied some jazz in high school. The guy who taught me a lot of this concepts about like getting an idea and sticking to it. He was a killer Latin jazz guitar player, and I never really had the attention span for properly mastering the advanced harmonic structures of a lot of jazz stuff in real time. I can understand it, but it's that doesn't mean I can pull it off in real time. Having said that, and I do know what the notes are going to sound like before I play them. So when I do some of these chromatic things, there's the cool thing about when you're playing a chromatic run like a when you do that, you're kind of allowed, if you're getting a little hot water, you're allowed to do some searching. I mean, you just keep going till you find a good one. Ideally, like when I'm right by a good one, then when you get to that good one, hit it real hard and stop, and then you'll sound like you kind of meant for exactly that to happen. But one thing I want to mention that I noticed I do in the solo, and this is to your point about the conversation thing, is I noticed listening back to that I kind of alternate a lot between playing stuff that sounds melodic and kind of jazzy melodic stuff and to just going just kind of ignorant balls to the walls blues things with complete disregard for harmony or chord changes, which is a whole different approach. And I just tend to oftentimes just kind of switch between the two as a contrast. And it also sounds like to me it gives the impression of a conversation between a two-way conversation between two pretty different personalities. But that's something that's something I always enjoy, and I always like when you hear jazz guys do that. You hear pop singers, they'll sing, melodic, harmonically correct or advanced stuff, and all of a sudden they'll just bust in and do a blues lick, and it's super cool. It's super efficient. You can always recognize it because it's a whole unique sound. So what I do on a lot of these more uptown kind of slow blues things is I kind of I will go back and forth just as a way to be a little jarring and kind of spice it up and make the people not know exactly what to expect next. You don't want to be predictable because there's a lot of people playing blues, and it has sometimes gotten the reputation for being somewhat boring, and we want to avoid perpetuating that.
That's awesome. All right, so I got a couple questions for you here.
All right.
So questions from our audience. So how much did you learn once you started gigging in bars and clubs, playing with and seeing other musicians versus, just working on your own and practicing stuff? What was the difference there for you?
No, that's I like that question, because you would think it feels like the answer should be, oh, you don't know anything until you got out there and started, playing for real, and you have to, you realize you don't know, but when I think about it now, it's actually not entirely true. One of the first gigs I had was well, it was one of the first really good gigs I had. I was in a house band in this blues club in Oslo, and we would back up all these American artists. And I spent most of my youth, kind of like in voluntary seclusion, and in my basement with records and listening to imaginary people from over in America in the way before time, and and I learned all their stuff. I knew like a couple of people who were into the same stuff as me, and being a musician, you're kind of like naturally often even though you might have a big ego, you also be like kind of naturally assume that everybody else has it together more than you. That's for me. It's been like something I've noticed in a lot of musicians, and especially myself. And one thing I noticed when I got in this house band was we would bring over these artists from America, and one of them was Willie Big Eye Smith, the Muddy Waters old drummer, and he called out and said, "Yeah, well, let's try and do Last Night," and and I go, okay, and I started playing. I mean, I knew the song because I had spent so much of my life listening to all these records, and it was just ingrained in me. And I remember the bass player and the drummer, who were, by the way, I was 19 and they were like in their 50s, and they go, "How did you know that?" And my reaction was like, "Doesn't everybody know that?" I just assumed that everybody knew a whole lot more than me. So I think just really getting into it and learning stuff on your own. I mean, there's really great value in that, and you have to spend a lot of time doing that. And for me, I think once you get out there playing with people, gigging, those kinks, the kinks that that for me anyways, that I ran into at first, iron them out pretty quickly. It's what you've already put in your musical brain that that determines what you're going to be putting out, and then after that it's just a matter of learning how to adapt.
Awesome. Good answer, man.
I
Good
could probably
answer.
give an answer with like the complete opposite opinion.
I love it. That's another way to look at it, right?
Yeah, that's another way to look at it. But right now, I feel like emphasizing that. I mean, they're both really important, because God knows I'm not, after being let out of my basement, now since I was probably like 19 years old, I've changed a lot from the people I met and the musicians I played with, and the things I've learned from them. There's definitely something to be said for human interaction. Although I think that's over with now, so we're back to
Yeah. Now we're back
to where I began.
You've come full circle now.
That's right.
All right, so here's a question. We're going to throw in a couple of variation questions here, but this one's about, how do you approach playing over changes like Stormy Monday? How do you, just like the stuff that's in Stormy Monday, how are you thinking about that when you're playing and soloing? Are you still hitting chord tones? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Like this song has kind of Stormy Monday like changes.
Yep.
And like I said, like the cool thing about blues is that you can go either way, and both approaches are kind of valid. You can play. You can play with the changes and define the changes, and play in kind of in a different position for each chord, and you can do that, or you can just just play the blues over it. You can go either way, as long as you know what you're going for. either approach can be used efficiently. Now, one does require more thought. I'd be playing over all those damn chords. But and the thing is, if when you get deeper into it, there's a lot of jazzy like substitutions you can do. I mean, the T-Bone Walker, the Stormy Monday changes are just kind of a simplifier, dumbed down version of what Charlie Parker and those guys were doing with blues changes. They had all, these bebop guys had just a million different ways of getting back to the one in a 12-bar blues, and I don't think I have time to get into all of those now. But one of them is to just go chromatic down from B flat. This is instead of the Stormy Monday changes. Instead of going, you can go just chromatic down to G. And there's a bunch of different variations on that, on different ways of doing that turnaround. And I'm sure there's someone more sophisticated in your stable who can go into that in more depth than me. But the few cool variations I have learned, I try to incorporate. And you can also find that you can play one variation in your soloing over a slightly different variation in the rhythm section, and it'll still work, or you can just ignore it and play blues. That works too. But still, I do like it when people land on notes that's harmonically relevant. Like if you're gonna go and then land there on the 5 or something. You can sound aggressive and primitive, but it's cool to at least at some point in what you're playing, give people a sneaking suspicion that you might know what you're doing.
That's awesome. All right. So let's talk about our third variation, right?
All right.
One more variation. So give me a little breakdown or a little bit of overview of what you're going to do in this variation, what we should be looking for or listening for.
Yes. This is one particular that I noticed that I'm playing. I'm doing the thing where I'm essentially playing two different voices. I got a main idea. I made a cup of coffee. It's like, oh shit, well, I need a musical idea to build off of, and then for some reason I just thought, in octaves, just because it was a smooth, sophisticated sound, and that's my idea that I build off. But then I do a lot of answers to that in a completely different tone and voice, and that goes into that two-way conversation thing that I was talking about. That I think is something that keeps stuff very interesting. Or I'll go and then answer with something like that. So I do a lot of that in this one, and what I suggest for for all the students, the people out there wanting to do what I do, why, that's your business, but like some of these concepts I'm talking about, like the building on an idea, when you practice, and you should do a lot of practice, and with backing tracks, whatever you can find, with a metronome, with some music in the background that you're playing along with. And you should practice these ideas because they're concepts more. They're not like a certain way to finger a scale or how to sweep pick, or it's not like lick number 31 on page 4. They're conceptual things, but try and apply them, but exaggerate it. Just totally exaggerate it so you get so you really can get the idea ingrained in your head. How about to use an idea, repeat and variations, stuff like that. But just torture yourself with it a little bit and exaggerate it when you practice it. And you probably don't want to do that in front of people, on a show or even a rehearsal. But that's that's how you get the concepts in your brain at home. And some of this I kind of exaggerated, particularly in the beginning. And yeah, I probably talked too long, so
That's right. Well, let's roll this track. Let's have a listen. Nice, man.
No,
Very
it was it wasn't as exaggerated in the beginning as I remember it being, but I definitely went through some kind of a personality transformation there from the beginning to the end, and I guess it became more apparent as it went along. That's actually something that came to mind when I listened to this too. One of the hardest things for me was always to solo, because we're talking about harmonically relevant soloing. That is the title of this segment. Ironically, I was going to bring up the concept of playing over a song with no chord changes, because those come up in blues a lot of times. Vamps. The songs are they're just one chord songs. Those I used to find the most hardest thing to play over, because you know, nothing is going anywhere. You know, it's any kind of a movement you have to create yourself completely with with your solo. So, and that tool I do there, where I do my solo like it's a conversation between two different voices. You know, maybe one has a, and the other one is that's the thing that can be very effective also over one chord solos. You know, a way to create that tension and release still. You know, to have like two different personalities of your playing in this conversation. The contrast. So that's a quick tip for playing over. That works also if we're playing over solo songs with no chord changes. I can't hear you.
Oh, there we are. There we are.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. We've got time for one more question. So going to give you this question. It's a tough one, but what would you suggest for the one blues album? If you would say, man, if anybody wants to learn how to play the blues, where would they study? What would be the one album you would suggest they go out and get?
Well, I'm at an unfair advantage now because I watched you ask Matt Schofield that question earlier. So I had time to think about it.
One.
I only get one. Yeah, yes. I don't need three. Well, okay. I can give a short answer, and also, but one thing I want to say is that there's a lot of people that would tell you, hey, if you want to play blues, you want to play this or that, well, you need to learn this. You need to study this guy. You need to listen to everything this guy did. You need to learn every lick that this guy played. And really, that's there's truth to that. If you want to be a backup musician and you want to be able to do all these different kind of gigs, but really, if you're learning what you should listen to, what you should spend time listening to, is just what turns you on. That's what you should be learning and checking out, because that's what gives you the spark for music. And I don't care what it is. We don't all have to go through the same school of learning the same stuff from the same people. Just check out a bunch of stuff, and don't force yourself to listen to something and over and over again just because people tell you should. Just listen to the stuff that turns you on and use that as inspiration for getting better. Short answer: BB King live at the Regal.
All right, there you go. Good job, man. Well, that was great. Man, so many people, so many people in the chat have said that you're their favorite player. Loving you there. So very cool. We thank you.
They're spam bots. I paid them.
Can't wait to get you back in the studio when all the world gets back to normal. But thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate you being here. And
hey, likewise. I mean, that's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And say hi to Josh. I'll be watching them.
All right, we'll do, man. We'll do. Thank you.
He's got a long time to prepare for that question now, so he better get it right.
Yeah. We'll test him. Yeah. Awesome. That is Kid Andersen. Thank you guys so much. For tuning in, watching Kid here. We saw Matt Schofield. We saw Kid Andersen. We've got more coming up. But don't forget, all of this is being recorded. We are going to put together an amazing course where we will have all of the breakdowns, all of the cool licks and variations they're playing. We're going to tab all those out. So you're going to get tab and standard notation of all that. We will have all of not only their performances, the original videos as well with the tab and jam track, and then all of the breakdowns and their answers to all of your questions. And there's tons of gold there, right? Lots of good educational nuggets in there when they're answering these questions that everyone is asking. So don't forget to drop your questions that are relevant to what Josh is going to teach in the chat when he comes up. But for sure, once we have this course all together, you can download this course and you will be able to play it in the TrueFire player. So you'll have all the cool tools like looping, slow-mo, the tab sync. It'll all be there for you to have. And what's even better right now, if you want to pre-order it tonight, if you RSVP'd and you're here, that means we want to give you something special. So you can hit the pre-order link and pre-order this course for 50% off, right? So, once again, just what we've seen so far, totally no-brainer to get this and have all of the tab for all of these variations and everything. Tons of stuff to work on and learn from here. So because you're here, we appreciate you being here. You can get 50% off of this course. So hit the pre-order link that we'll post there in the chat, and you can get this course on a pre-order. So we are not through with our camp. I'm hoping that your camp is going well. We got a fire going here. We're cooking s'mores on the campfire. So all of our campers are up late, but that's okay because we have another educator, another one of TrueFire's favorite educators, favorite people, amazing player. Mr. Josh Smith is here with us. He has several TrueFire courses out as well, does several more in the can, ready to go, things on the books, ready to do some more. So, but we'll talk about all of that. He's going to dive into one specific lesson and give us some cool insight into that. So without further ado, let's get in to saying hello to Josh. How you doing, man?
I'm well. How you guys doing?
Doing great, man. We're doing well, and hanging out here just doing some bluesing tonight. How about yourself?
Oh, same. Been doing a little bit of session work this afternoon, and then waiting for this. Looking forward to hanging out with all you guys.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to it too. So let's get into it. I'll tell you what, we're going to talk, or you're going to talk a little bit about a lesson from from your course, basically, talking about phrasing and time, which is so crucial, so important to playing anything, but certainly the blues. So why don't you give us a little bit of a quick overview? Everybody's got access to the original, but give us a little bit of an overview of, how you think about that phrasing and time stuff.
Yeah, phrasing and time are truly like the difference makers, because you build up all of this vocabulary and knowledge and facility of all these things you're able to do, and you learn, and you start to, bring all those things to the table. But if you can't say them and execute them in a conversational and pleasing way to like something the audience can relate to and that your fellow musicians can react to, then it's going to get lost in the shuffle, and you're not going to make that impact that you're looking to with your improvisation. Again, it's incredibly personal, so it's a hard thing to teach, but there are tools you can do and use to develop your personal phrasing and time, which helps you develop, your language and your sound on the instrument. So I found a few things that helped me when I was young that I can hopefully pass on to you guys.
That's excellent. Good insight there. And once again, students have access to that original video, and they should definitely check that out, because you're going to give us some variations, right? You're going to do some variations on the original lesson and sort of expand on that. So let's get into that first variation, man. So give us a little overview of what the first variation is about.
So one of the tools I used when I was starting to find my way in phrasing was building a theme and then expanding on that theme. So I would make myself, when a solo started, take whatever the first lick or phrase that came out and have that become the theme of the entire solo. And I would expand on that. I'd reference it. I'd go away from it. I'd return to it. And those are the type of things that give you a conversational approach to your soloing. And those are little hooks that, again, non-musician, regular audience members can kind of latch onto and grab. So I would force myself, sometimes exaggeratingly, to do it too much. This is the theme and I'm going to play it over and over. But when I made myself do it, it started to become natural, and I started to be able to build themes no matter how long or how short the solo was. I was able to give it a real direction.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look at the first variation. Let's roll that. That's amazing, man. That sounds
Thank you,
great.
sir.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing there, how you're approaching that.
So obviously that was completely improvised, but whatever the first lick came out, which ended up being, I took that lick and just, kind of hammered it into the ground, but purposely to kind of help me with developing that theme and creating a common thread that ran through the solo. So I would listen to it, I'd move away from it, I'd reference it in different octaves. I would keep bringing it in and out, and it gave that commonality through the course of the whole solo. And those are the things people can really relate to.
Awesome. Can you get a little more volume out of your guitar, man?
Out of my guitar, yeah. How's this?
Even a little more if you had.
Yeah, sure. How about this?
Yeah, there we go. We can always use more guitar, right?
Yeah.
So when you're
right.
doing that and you're thinking about kind of developing that theme, how do you know when to go back to that? Like we do it and then you do something else. Is it just a feel thing, or are you kind of thinking about here's when the progression's coming around, here's how I'm tackling that?
Well, sometimes it will be, when I was starting out, sometimes it'd be, okay, I'm going to play this phrase every 4 bars. So it's a real hook of the phrase. So I may play. So it's coming back and forth and coming around. As I get more comfortable, I'm going to move away from it and keep developing the solo, in a natural way with the things that I'm hearing and on the fly, and still be able to reference it because it will become part of my thought process. So I may end up moving up. And bring it back, in the mix, because I'm going to hear it. I've stated it. My head, my ears, they want that. They want it to come back,
Right. Very cool. Very cool. So we've got a couple questions. We've got a couple questions about, hybrid picking, right? So when you're tackling some of these licks, right? How are you approaching that? Are you thinking, you consciously think about that hybrid picking, or are you just doing whatever seems to fit?
Well, the hybrid picking for me is totally unconsciously done now, but there were things that I used to do to work on that. Again, it's a completely physical thing, so it's hard to tell you, oh, you have to do it this way, because it may feel more comfortable for you to do it a different way. For me, I tend to replace a lot of upstrokes with my middle finger, and I think that's where it kind of started for me. I started to find more fluidity in replacing some of my upstrokes with the pick with my finger instead, and that was the beginnings for me, I think.
Very cool. So would you say that would be a good thing, for guys to work on, maybe doing downstroke, and then when the upstroke for stuff, just replace that with the finger?
Yeah, I do a lot of triplets where I do 2 downstrokes, and then the third note is the finger. So I'll play really simple triplets like where that third note is plucked with my middle finger, and the first 2 notes are downstrokes. But that gives you some of that roll sound that the hybrid picking thing can give you, some of that banjo. If I get into it, it's a circular motion. That's how you get kind of that circular motion.
Very awesome. Awesome. So we're going to do a few questions here, and then we'll roll into another variation. But there's a question that basically asks, could you move that phrase that you play, that you start out with there, to hit the sweet notes of the chord changes rather than repeat in the same place? So treat it a little bit more like a motif you're developing, but still moving it around and going through the chord tones.
Well, of course. So the way I did it in that example was really on the nose, so I'm playing it a lot to kind of make a point. But yeah, I'm going to move it around. If you noticed, even in that example, one time I played it up here, and then I went to the 4. So I used it to kind of get me from the 1 to the 4 by targeting, the root note of the 4th chord, but I could target the major third of things like that. So absolutely, I'll use that. It's like, I see it as like a hanger or a hook or a nail, and you hang things off of it. So I keep kind of moving in and around it, and I can kind of lay a lick on top of it and then go away and then come back and hang something else there. It's like a grounding point or something, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that explanation. Sort of hanging your licks around.
Right.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, let's do the second variation. So tell us a little bit about second variation, what you're thinking there, what we should be listening for.
So on this second variation, I'm really painting myself into a corner. I'm putting myself in a box where I'm limiting what I can do. So I'm going to play the whole solo in one section of the fretboard, couple strings, couple frets, and make myself say something interesting with not a lot of information available to me. Because I found if I could make an interesting solo happen without all my fretboard available and without all my knowledge and all that available to me, if I could still make a good solo that said something with that, it was so much easier once I then allowed everything else back in to the toolbox,
Very cool. All right, well, let's roll that one. Nice. All right, so break some of that down for us. Show us kind of what you're doing there.
So obviously I was forcing myself to stay within the 8th and the 10th fret on the G, B, and E strings. And I wanted to tell a story with only that information available to me. So that meant playing with dynamics. It meant playing with chromatic phrasing, with bends, with intent, with, energy and sometimes angst, to make a solo with only that stuff available to me. So I would hammer home. And until you can tell a story like that, nobody's going to be able to relate. That's why everybody can listen to Albert King, and he plays 5 notes, give or take, in most of his solos. But nothing kind of ever has affected me the way that listening to him take a solo does. And it's because of the way he's able to break up the beat and put, inflection and time and phrasing and all those things together. It doesn't matter how many notes he knows or scales or runs or this or that. It's the way that you say it. So when you start to build that conversational style to your playing, I can take any notes and make an audience react to it. I can give it a swing. I can give it a feel where I know even if I play one note, that the audience immediately is going to start bobbing their head, tapping their feet, and feel that. And, doing little things like that seem mundane or simple make a big impact once you start to open that approach back up to your regular playing and all the information you have available to you.
All right, great stuff, man. So let's do a couple questions. One question here. Do you have any tips for improving or practicing the rhythm in your improvisation? So what's your tips for getting better at having some groove in your improv?
So one of the best things you can do to help your pocket, because, we all practice in time. I was never a metronome guy, so I didn't really ever practice with a metronome, actually never. But what I did was play along with a lot of records. And what I practiced the most, believe it or not, and what I think had the most impact on my time and my pocket is rhythm guitar. Practicing rhythm guitar had such an impact on my lead playing because it helped me tie the clock that I have going on inside me, my internal clock. It tied it to my hands so that all these things I was hearing and feeling, the pulse I was feeling, I could then start to actually apply. So I would sit and play, I'd take that same shuffle and just play rhythm and start to break it up as many ways as I can. Add fills in between chords, change the time, go over the bar line. So I would do things like... those little things like that, I could start to get my clock where it didn't matter where I was, what I was playing. I was comfortable that if I left that groove, I could maintain the pulse while going anywhere I wanted. So those type of exercises, I would pick a static groove, maybe a funk groove, something like... and I'd establish that straight eighth note groove, and then maybe I'd change the time of it every bar, and that would help my internal clock greatly. Things like... until I could break that up almost any way I wanted. And then when I went back to my soloing, I found, oh, I had way more flexibility in my time. So if that same groove was going on my head, I could hit... until I could almost subdivide that beat anyway, cross the bar lines. The rhythm playing helped me kind of establish that comfort with time and the ability to pulse and change things and move things around, because that's what makes the difference between, I think, the greatest improvisers and the other great ones, is their ability to play with time and just have great time and feeling. That's truly the separator between the top echelon and everybody else, I think.
Awesome. Good answer. So another question is, a lot of times we tell beginners, people starting out, target the root note. When you start a phrase, make sure you're on the root note, which is good, solid advice. So we've got a question. What are some other ways to come into a solo without targeting the root note? Do you have any thoughts on how do you get into a solo without doing that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, obviously it depends on what the chords are. And sometimes to some degree what the groove is, how I'm gonna start a solo. An important thing with starting any solo, besides thinking of it technically, where, oh, I should, I know this is a A major 7, so maybe I want to target that major 7, or I want to target the 6. Whatever, I want to hit those notes that are the pertinent intervals in the chord. Okay, we need to be thinking about that. But I think another thing that a lot of guys don't pay enough attention to when starting a solo is what's the first idea that really popped in your head. So when I hear that chord immediately, instead of thinking what is the right scale or thing to play over this chord or what notes, I'm paying attention immediately to the narrative that just hit my head. So when I hear that, I hear, so I'm going to play until and kind of use that as my guide. I think we get into this world where we know this scale and these things work over every chord, and we kind of fall into these traps where we're thinking about that all the time instead of actually, you always have an idea initially. Listen to that first idea. So try singing, try playing a chord and sing the first thing that comes to your mind. And you'll realize real quick that that's something you would have never played. I do that a lot. I'll establish a groove and just start singing the way I just did, and have that become the way I start a solo.
Cool. Good tip. Let's do one more question here. Let's. Do you think that playing with someone with a different style or sound sort of creeps into your lines in a good way? They say, like when you play with Bruce Foreman, for example.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't help but be influenced by, the world that you're in. So, every opportunity for me to play guitar is an opportunity for me to learn. Every opportunity to go see another person play is an opportunity to learn, and not just from guitar players, from all instruments, from singers, from drummers, from saxophone and trumpet players, you know, keyboard players. So, I mean, also the styles of music that you end up getting yourself into. When I first moved to LA, I had done nothing but play my own music. So it was a rude awakening for me when I started getting hired to do sessions and tour with artists, and the music was maybe not my cup of tea, not things I was even interested in. Or maybe I did like it, but I'd never actually, you know, put the time in to really learn all the things behind it. But when you do that, all of a sudden those things start to come back into your world. So yeah, when I sit around and listen to Bruce Foreman, or if I sit around and listen to literally any music, I'm trying to listen to it with the mindset of, let me find something in here that I can bring back to my world. But not even that, let me listen with enough of an open mind that let me really pay attention to what piques my interest. Because whenever I'm hearing something, you're going to get a reaction. It could be negative, it could be positive, but I want to kind of realize when that reaction's happening so that I can take that and go, oh, what was that actually just got my attention? Let me figure out why it got my attention. Let me not just learn that lick or that tone or that thing. Why did it even pique my interest? What was it? So I'm trying to listen with that kind of an open mind to everybody. So when I listen to Sam Cooke and I hear him go, whoa, whoa, you know, that's something I've brought into my playing immediately when I heard him, because it was so brilliant and I could never get it out of my head after I heard it. So you got to be open to all of that, wherever, you know, every instrument, every kind of style, and be willing to bring that, because the more you have available to you, the better you can tell your thing. So it's never a negative to learn something new, grab something from here, from there, because again, the more information at your disposal, the better and more honestly you can tell your story.
Very good, very good. So a question, let's do one more question here that relates to that. Says, I know Josh is also a huge jazz aficionado. Where and what would you pull from, like Sonny Rollins, for example? How would you incorporate that? And can you give us an example of something like that?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times when I'm listening to jazz, for me it's about not just all the brilliant things they play over every chord. So they normally know more things than I know to play over every chord. They know all their tritone substitutions and their secondary dominant chords and all the great scales and chord tones that you can play over every chord. That kind of stuff, you need to work on that on your own, and you want that to be almost autopilot. And I'm trying to shut that part of my brain off so that I can do what I think is the most important thing I can grab from the jazz guys, which is how to build bridges between chords. And they do that, you know, it's what separates jazz guys from everybody else, quite honestly. They build little bridges. So Sonny Rollins will take a tune, you know, and he may play, you know, a 2-5-1, you know, or he may play a 2 to 4 minor, or he may chromatically go. So that's 3 ways that he just connected a 1 chord to a 4 chord by playing a 2-5-1 or chromatically moving it around. Or, you know, I could use a diminished chord to get from here to. So I'm trying to think of those things the way that jazz guys do. That's, you know, besides the brilliant playing and phrasing and tone and all the things they do, they connect the dots in a way that other musicians don't. So that's my biggest thing about jazz, and bringing that into my world is finding as many of those bridges as I can so that I can be on autopilot thinking about what to play about the chords, and I can spend all my mental energy on how do I connect this chord to the next. Let me keep this solo moving fluidly and make these little bridges between chords.
And those bridges between chords allow you to then, you know, you can emphasize chord tones in a chord and keep something fairly simple, but the bridges allow you to stretch out a little bit and do some different stuff, right?
Exactly. I mean, and then, you know, once you get comfortable with that stuff, then then it's, you know, it's self-editing. I'm making choices. So if I'm going from A to D, 1 to the 4, and then back, right? Well, I could play a 2-5 to get me from A to D by playing E minor, like E minor A to get me to D, and then going back I can play B minor A flat diminished to lead me to A, or I could play B minor D minor to lead me to A, or I could play B minor and move chromatically by playing. So I'm gonna make those little, or I'll just play blues. Maybe I'll play and then to to get me back to the one. So I'm constantly making choices on the fly about how to connect the dots, and not so much worrying about what to play when I arrive or when I'm over a chord. I kind of let fate take care of that, I guess.
Right. And then it usually works out well for you. So that usually happens.
We all have, the years of work that we've put in. And I remember a conscious shift, 20 years ago where it became, you know what? I know that I know one thing at least to play on every chord. It may be just a pentatonic scale, or maybe it's whatever. I know the main intervals. I know it's a 13th chord. I know what to hit, or a major 7, or an alter chord. Maybe it's a flat 5 or a flat 9 or flat 13, whatever. I know something, at least one thing to work on every chord. If I let that just happen naturally, it frees me up to do the rest. And that's when I kind of felt like, you know what? I'm really starting to tell real stories in my solos. It's not just, it's the mix of all that. It's the phrasing and the time, the pocket. It's all that knowledge you've built up. And then how do you keep that moving forward, in the most direct way? I don't always like to say, less simple, because less is more is a great place to start, but you can say a lot of stuff and still say it super in a direct way where I'll feel it. And so that's what I'm trying to get to all the time. Like, say it directly as possible so that you feel it.
Nice. Very nice. Well, let's look at, we got a third variation. Let's look at our third variation, and then we can get into some more questions. But let's do the third variation. You're talking about trading with yourself, right?
Yeah, so this factors into a lot of what we're talking about right now. When I was starting to build this conversational manner to my playing, I would sit on the edge of my bed and I would sing lines to myself and answer them back as if I was trading with another musician. And then I would also just do it in my solo. I'd play a lick, and I'd force that lick to be answered by the next lick, whatever it was. Because, again, this opens up new ways of thinking about time, about phrasing. It's not so much about the notes. If I sing, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, ba, I might not never play that. So I might answer that with, like, ba-doo-dee-ah, 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 ba-doo-doo. I'd probably never play something rhythmically that way if I hadn't just sung it that way. So doing these little things were all kind of to help me hone my, sharpen my tools so that when I was really telling the story I wanted, I had not no limitations, but less limitations in my way to get it out.
Very cool. All right, well, let's roll this. Yeah. It's awesome. All right. So let's break that down a little bit. Talk about some of those, any of those amazing licks.
Well, I'm really trying. I mean, it sounds silly, but I was really trying to listen to myself closely. So if I played something, I really wanted it to be, the cause of what came next. So it could be anything, but if I play like immediately I'm hearing ba-dum, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da-da as an answer to that lick. So when you're conscious of that and you're paying attention, it can't help but make your solo come out in this conversational way that there's no way anybody with a pulse cannot feel that and understand that feeling. And that's, independent of what the song is, what the groove is, what the notes you're playing. If you take that approach, it makes the solo relatable. So I used to, do it ad nauseum. I'd sit on the end of my bed and play a lick. So you heard I played, and then I answered it when I got to the 4, but I doubled. So I made kind of, a call and response with myself the way it would be if I was playing with another guitar player or another instrument and he was trading with me. And I think that makes the solo, it's silly, but it feels like it lays itself out for you. When you do these things, whatever the first thing comes out, the rest kind of just takes care of itself. And those are the solos you're trying to play, things where you get out of your own way and you let the stuff happen. And again, like the most honest and natural way. I think people can tell the difference between a soloist who's doing that and a soloist who's like going through the motions, or on the other half of that is like playing with some ego and trying to play something to get your attention or impress you, or, versus a guy who's just playing from here in the moment. It may be incredibly intelligent with a lot behind it, but if you're playing in the moment, I think people can tell the difference.
Yeah, very cool. That authenticity is important, playing from what you got.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it doesn't always mean playing simple as possible.
Right.
Yeah, you want to be able to say what you want to say as direct as possible, but I can listen to Steve Vai play a million notes, and still feel something, or, listen to Bruce Foreman swinging his ass off, but play a gazillion notes and really feel it, the same as I feel Albert King play 3 notes or B.B. King play 2. It's the intent. Does he really believe what he's playing? I think people can tell the difference when people believe what they're playing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm a believer, man. So let's do a few questions. Let's do some questions here.
All right.
Okay. So can you talk about how to move from tension to release, like how to wind down a tense conversation, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, the tension is crucial in having that conversation and in telling your story. The same way you would, talk to somebody and try to get your point across. There's going to be moments where you may say something they don't want to hear, and it may cause some a certain amount of uncomfortability. But it's important in building a story. So if I play, that may not always be harmonically. If you heard in that last exercise, when we got to the going back to the 5, I changed up my time. I was like, I think something like that. And I use that time to resolve me to the 5th chord and create a real landing, but you have to be cognizant of, keeping the narrative moving forward. So let's say I'm up here on the 1, and I want to get myself to D, right? So I may play D flat diminished or B flat. So a lot of times it's driven by going to the next chord, but sometimes maybe it's not. Maybe I'll go even further over that next chord and continue to create tension. So I'll go like, so there I use diminished to get me to the 4. But then going back on the 1, I didn't just resolve to some blues. I went and used a rhythmic phrase to keep that tension going without it being harmonically tension. So you got to kind of, use what you got and feel that narrative building in your head. You'll hear when it's the right time to lay on that. To me, a resolve is like a breath. So it's the right time when's the right time to kind of ease up and take a breath in the playing. I like to think of it as when I'm playing stuff like that, I want to hear it so clearly that it's clear to me that I have to play it right now. So when I hear, a 2-5-1 or a diminished chord or a chromatic passing note or something like that, I'm hearing it so much so that there's no other choice but to play it right then. So then I know when to resolve because I've heard it already. I've heard, 2 bars ahead how it's going to lay out. If you do that and you kind of hold it back until you really hear it and feel it, it'll work itself out. You'll know when to resolve.
Cool. So here's another question. Any tips for getting into a headspace where you're playing in the moment versus overthinking what you're doing?
The best tip would be take a breath before the solo even starts, or even lay out for a bar or two, especially if you're taking the solo from someone else. So let's say there's another guitar player or a keyboard player, and he's taking a solo, and it's winding down. We've all been in this situation where, all right, go, and you come in, like a bat out of hell, just, with no restraint, just come in like you've been waiting for your moment, But if you take that same approach and let the first bar go by, and maybe let the second bar go by, you're going to find automatically an idea is going to come into your head. You're going to hear, if you let that bar just go, I hear bum, 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 something comes in. And again, then it just lays itself out for you because you're not thinking. You're just reacting and playing smoothly and, in the moment. So try that. Take the first bar of the solo out of your mind. Don't play. Take a breath and let it come to you. Take that first idea and then build from there. Instead of like waiting like you're just, you're going to bust the walls down.
That's good. All right, another question. What aspect of soloing do you find the most challenging?
Oh, making those bridges is the most challenging because as we move out of songs that are all diatonically related and the chord changes, you have to start to make new connections that aren't as comfortable, So if I'm going from, G to C, it's very easy for me to make a little bridge that goes from G to C. But if I'm going from, A minor to G minor to F sharp D over F sharp, then I've got to think more about creating those bridges. The tools are the same, but those are the things where, again, that's why I'm kind of whittling down my process so that those are the only things I worry about. Because, as the changes start to become more complex and not diatonic, you have to put more effort into, otherwise it's just going to sound like I'm playing arpeggios and changing keys on every chord. So that's absolutely the hardest thing about, soloing as you move forward as an improviser.
Very nice. So what about, thinking of other scales outside of, pentatonics, right? For a lot of beginner players, most of them start with the pentatonics. They're going to learn the pentatonic scale. What's that next step for those players, guys that can, kind of play through a 12 bar, but they're mostly sticking with minor pentatonic scale and they want to start branching more into, sounding like a little bit more like they know what they're doing. What's that first step for them that you would recommend?
Besides those little bridges we were talking about, like for me, there's 3 main bridges I use, and that would be chromatics, diminished and augmented chords, and turnarounds, because these things literally only exist to create tension or movement, forward motion, a bridge between chords. But there's a lot of guys I talked to. I gave a lot of lessons last week, a ton. There are a lot of guys who know the pentatonic scale flawlessly up and down the neck, all 5 positions, but don't know the major scale in every key and can't play a chord scale for me. So if I ask them really, they know the 1-4-5 because they play blues, but if I ask them in every key, quickly tell me what the 6 is, what's the flat 7, what's this, they couldn't do it. That's the other half, I think, of the extreme comfort on the fretboard. If you know the pentatonic scale up and down in every key, but you also know the major scale up and down in every key, and more importantly, know your intervals, know the chords that relate to each interval in the major scale, then you will be so much more comfortable. You can start to fill in those blanks, before you even start talking about other scales and modes. These are the real tools that help you connect a chord. So when I make a choice to play that 2-5-1, like doing this, it's because I know diatonically that, you know, those chords are connected. So if you know those major scales and start to put, you know, if I move to a progression that's not a blues, like 1, 6, 4, 5, you know, a very standard pop progression, I could start to make decisions where, you know, to people who just play blues, you'll think it's me playing out or getting outside the box, but it's not. If I play G, F minor, B, E, I'm playing a 2-5-1 that's completely diatonic to the scale that we're playing in. So it may sound interesting if I go, you know, so there I use the 2-5-1 and then a chromatic chord to get from the 4 to the 5, and then a diminished chord, and then chromatically move back to the 1. So I use 3 different bridges to make those chords connect. And again, that's not so much, it's nothing exotic or crazy new scales that you have to learn. It's just being comfortable with what are the intervals in each key, you know. So yeah, it's, you know, nobody wants to work on this stuff, but if you just know those things, you know, what are the flats and sharps in each key? What are the chord tones? What's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Don't even worry yet about 9, 11, 13, you know, because if you know the first half, you know that too. Those little things, I mean, I think are what really unlocks the fretboard in the most comfortable way for anybody. Knowing the pentatonic scale in every key and knowing the major scale in every key and as chords. I don't think there's anything that unlocks the fretboard as well as those 2 things.
That's a good answer, man. Good answer. So on the sort of flip side of some of the stuff we're talking about how to play interesting things, the next question is, how do you get yourself when you're soloing to not just play familiar licks? How do you get yourself to not play those rut licks that everybody does, and get yourself to be able to expand that? How do you break out of that for a newer player?
Oh, the only way around that is by doing the things we're talking about at the beginning here. Doing the tools that help you find your voice and be out of your own way. You know, because you have to be not thinking about, you know, you can't be paying attention to that, you know, the little notes where, you know, if in the second beat of the 4 chord, you've got this lick that you've done a million times. Well, if you think about those things, you're never going to get away from them. Whereas if you do some of these little things where you trade with yourself, or you lock yourself into a little box, or, you know, you pick a theme and then you develop it over and over and over again, next thing you know, you won't be thinking about anything. All that stuff will be totally natural. And unfortunately, there's no way around that. It's just the amount of time you put into soloing, you know, and you don't have to always be playing with a backing track or with another musician. Look at a piece of paper with some changes on it and establish the groove in your head the same way I established that funk groove. Just get that going in your head and start to hear that narrative. You know, I'm automatically hearing where I want to go instantly. The second any kind of music comes on, you know, when Lady Gaga comes on, I hear something I could play over the top of it immediately, you know, whatever it is. You know, it may not be great, but I hear something. So pay attention to that. Like, what are you really hearing when a piece of music is going on, or a backing track, or whatever you're listening to, and go that way. Go further that way. Pay attention to what you're hearing in your head.
Very cool. I have a question here. Do you have any tricks to cover up mistakes, or when you get lost in the progression? If you get lost, you're playing and you get lost, what would a good tip be for at that point?
Okay, if you're playing and you know, covering up mistakes is a weird thing. I like to embrace the mistake. So, you know, everybody says that whole thing, oh, it's not a mistake if you play it twice, like play it again. I don't necessarily do that, but I don't just try to like gloss over it. You know, it's like, it's okay if you make a mistake. You just got to embrace it and move on. When you get lost, though, in the chords, I hate that feeling. It's a terrifying feeling. Now, obviously, it doesn't really ever happen to me in blues or anything like that. But it has happened to me certainly on, you know, when I'm reading a real book and maybe it's a tune I've never played and I'm on a bandstand and I'm playing this tune. So I have to be looking at the chart because I've never played this song. So then when it's your turn to solo, you're trying to be in the moment, but also maybe you're not 100% comfortable with these changes because you've never played. Not that you can't play through them. You may be comfortable in that way, but maybe you just don't know them by heart, you know? So that feeling is terrifying. when you think you know where you're going and the chord change happens and you go, oh, it wasn't that chord, it was the 6 right there. The only way to do that and feel comfortable is to kind of take as many breaths as you can in your solo, so that if you're moving, not slowly, but kind of assuredly and with purpose, it'll all work out. And again, if you know the fretboard by doing those two things I talked about earlier, you'll never feel lost. So if I'm up here, I remember clearly as a kid, I'm playing blues only in this position, and then I get to here, and I'm Albert King all of a sudden. And then I get to here, and I'm BB King, and this is all I know, right? So finally I ventured up to here, and now I feel like I own the world because I have these 3 positions. And I'm playing a song, like a Motown song or something, and the guy calls out the 6. And I need to get that F sharp minor. Having done that homework on the major scale and stuff, it didn't matter where I was. So if I was playing, I can go right here to this F sharp minor, or I go, and feel comfortable that I'm okay. When you're playing kind of with that style and that pace, it doesn't matter. Just take a second, listen for a second, and if you're comfortable in that diatonic scale, you normally can pick out, okay, I know that's not the 5. That's probably either the 6 or the 2, because it's 6, 2, or 3. That's minor. Well, it's only one of those 3 chords then if it's diatonic. So when you're comfortable in that world, you're not going to get lost as easily. And even if you do, you can quickly course correct.
Very cool. Very cool. So one more question about silence. What about putting silence in there when you play licks, and how important is that in the whole idea of phrasing, right?
Yeah, it's important. It's not, the only thing that matters. It's important that you do it where you really hear it. You'll notice a lot of times, I don't know, how different I am from other guys, but I take my hand off the neck every now and then in the middle of a solo. You could see it in some of those exercises early. I may play, and I'll take my hand off as if almost a snap there in between licks. And it makes me slow down and put not pauses. I don't think of them as pauses. I think of them as like a breath where it even makes the next lick come out clearer and with more intent by doing little things like that. So I'll do that, and it's natural. It's not premeditated. I don't make myself take my hand off the fretboard or take breaths. It happens instinctively now, but I've noticed it is something I do more than maybe some other guys. I'll take my hand off the fretboard mid-solo, because I feel a pause happen. And it's almost like if you take your hand off the pause, it has to happen. There's no way around it. So, yeah, those things are important, but it's more about learning to follow your internal narrative so that you're saying really what you feel. So maybe what you feel is plenty of notes with not a lot of space in between. That's okay too. But if you're playing that because you really hear it, I'll know the difference. I'll be able to listen to you and go, oh, that guy's really in the moment and feel it. So it's more about like kind of paying attention to that, again, your narrative, your story.
Sure. All right. So we got another question about one of the things we talked about earlier, sort of that, putting yourself in a corner. Any other examples of corners, any ways that you could sort of limit yourself or any other corners you could put yourself into to help build your chops there?
Yeah. Maybe it won't be a place on the fretboard. Maybe it'll be a tone, so maybe I'll turn on. Maybe I'll turn on the Leslie sound, right? And I'll make it where I want to hear that. Maybe it's going to make me have more pauses because I want more sustains to have that sustained Leslie sound come out. So I may end up playing. So I kind of made myself put a sustained note, a whole note, every 8 beats or something like that. And so by doing that, it wasn't, I didn't paint myself into a position of the neck. I rhythmically limited myself and made myself hold notes out so that I could hear that tone happen. And I wouldn't have thought of that unless I turned that tone on and it gave me an idea. So there's all sorts of ways that you can push yourself into these little areas. And the more ways you can do that and get your point across with, again, as simple as possible, the better a solo you're going to play. There's no way around that. If you do these things, there's no way you're not going to become a better soloist.
Very, very cool. Very cool. All right, man. Well, I tell you what, we have had a awesome bunch of questions here from everybody just tuning in. They're blown away. Love your stuff. We of course love your playing at TrueFire. Can't wait to get you back in the studio doing more stuff, man. So I got one more question for you. This is the question I've been hitting everybody up with. So if somebody had to pick one, I'll give you a choice, 1, 2, 3 blues albums that they needed to really dig into, study, learn everything on there, really basically, learn from. What would be your choice, your top choices? 1, 2, or 3 albums that you would recommend?
For soloing, I would say B.B. King, Blues is King, or Live at the Regal. Albert King, Live Wire, Blues Power, or any Albert King, quite honestly. And for the rest of it, Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. If you want to learn how to be a gigging blues guitar player, to back up a singer, to back up a harmonica, to play with a piano player, just play along with Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. Yeah, you need to listen to Otis Rush and Magic Sam and all this other stuff, and Little Walter. And I mean, I could go on for an hour on it. But if you listen to Albert King and B.B. King as a soloist, and listen to the way guys play with Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, listen to Hubert Sumlin, play behind Howlin' Wolf, you'll learn everything you need to know to play, 89%, 90% of the blues you're going to get called for to do. So those would be the 3 things.
Very, very good, man. Well, thank you again, Josh, so much for being here and spending your time here with us this evening. You shared so much great stuff that I'm sure everybody will totally appreciate sitting down when they have a chance to really dig into it and learning everything. But thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, TrueFire. Thank you, everybody, for the good questions.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Oh, that was Josh Smith. So everybody who's tuned in, I tell you what, guys, once again, we are putting all of this amazing content together. We are going to tab out all of their variations. We're going to put this all together in a TrueFire player. So make sure while you're here, you go to the pre-order link, right? It's there. Pre-order, get this thing pre-ordered. You get 50% off if you pre-order it right now while you're here. So these will not be available on demand like many of our other live events are. So this won't be a on-demand thing that'll be out on YouTube. Since this is invitation only, it will basically be something that you will put together, and you'll be able to get yourself a cool course with all the tab, all the backing tracks, everything all put together. So thank you so much for being here, campers. Now it's lights out at camp, time to go to bed. But don't forget to join us for our jazz camp, Jazz Blues, that is happening on the 30th. Look for that info, sign up for that RSVP so you can get the link and be here for that one as well. All right, guys. Thank you. Peace out. Good night.